And welcome. It is time for the Re-Federalist Radio. My co-host, or should I say I'm his co-host, Brady the War Hamster, is working on getting connected. So I'm going to go ahead and start the program here. He'll join us as soon as he can. And we'll see what we got here. So one of the things I've been wanting to talk about, matter of fact, let's back up. The court system. And I've got a couple things that hopefully we were going to talk about. One of them I told him about. Our federal court system seems to have forgotten that Lady Justice wears a blindfold. Ideology, personal opinion, outside influences are not allowed when it comes to our legal system. They're not supposed to be a part of our legal system. But when it comes to the progressive far left deep state, the law and the truth doesn't matter. Only their hard left narrative and pretty much anything that they do, they act in a manner what they can against President Trump. And that's true when it comes to the indictment of John Bolton. I'm going to get into more of that in just a second. I want to remind everybody that you are listening to Zachy Radio, zachyradio.com, KPGF in Reno. Also want to remind everybody that Zachy Radio, that name may sound familiar to you. Zachy Chicken, yes. But Leo Zachy, zachyradio.com. Well, you can visit leozachy.com to learn more about his run for governor of California also. So don't forget to check that out. In fact, he's going to be in Southern California. I just was advertising this the other day, and I don't have it in front of me. He'll be in Southern California in San Marcos Vista area at a collection of a bunch of candidates that the local station, The Answer San Diego, KCBQ down there is sponsoring. So if you go to kcbq.com, you can learn more about that down in Southern California. So for you California listeners, Zachy for governor. Now, get back to what I was talking about. So we've got a court system who's been out of whack. We've got a court system that's been infiltrated by the hard left. How do I want to say this? The progressive leftists of the world and deep state, and the deep state, goes all the way back to Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson fired half of the bureaucracy when he took the presidency. The big government half. They have crept back in, and at that time also they launched themselves into the court system, and they're still there, and all they care about is their hard left narrative, and once again pretty much acting in any manner they can against President Trump. So when it came to the indictment of John Bolton, of course the deep state's judicial arm flexed its muscles. The judge tapped to oversee Bolton's criminal case is none other than Judge Theodore Chuang, or Chuang, Chuang, Chuang. I don't even know how to pronounce his name, but he's an Obama appointee, and he has a track record of torpedoing Trump-era policies and rubber stamping the radical left's agenda. And you know him, not by name, but by action. He's the judge from the first 4 years of President Donald Trump's time in the White House who unconstitutionally blocked the quote-unquote travel ban executive order that was based on existing law. You remember that, right? A ban of people traveling into the United States from countries that sponsor terrorism. There was a list of, 7 countries, 9 countries, something like that. And that executive order, and understand executive orders as of the early 60s are required to include in the executive order the law that's being executed. If a law is being executed, it's constitutional. The court said, no, you can't do it. Well, wait a second. But it was based on a law that exists, the McCarran-Walter Act, which is a statutory authority that's a part of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. And now it's a part of 8 U.S.C. 1185A, and the executive order banned travel from countries that sponsor terrorism. That's the guy who is now the judge overseeing the John Bolton case. What a coinkydink. How did that happen? Welcome, welcome to your program, Warhamster.
Yeah, I was getting ready to come into the studio right on time, and they asked me to allow permission to use my mic and camera. And for whatever reason, I clicked block instead of allow. And it took me 10 minutes to figure out how to get this fixed. But here I am. What I missed?
Technical difficulties. Well, I decided to save what I talked to you earlier about. Article I wrote about Grijalva. We'll talk about that hopefully later. And so I opened up with the judge that's taking the John Bolton case. And this guy is so bad that Representative Andy Ogles, I don't know how to pronounce his name, from Tennessee, actually filed articles of impeachment against this rogue judge. This is the guy also that went after Musk and Doge and President Trump, and he was the one that, if you remember, went after, struck down protections against chemical abortions during the scamdemic, calling it, protecting women's rights, blood of dead babies on his hands. But this, like I was also saying, this is the same judge also that struck down the quote unquote travel ban. And this is the guy who's been assigned to the John Bolton case. Well, now we got about a minute, so go ahead.
I'll give you a quick one. That's one of the problems with all these real big cases like Comey, Bolton, et cetera, is you're trying them in districts that are basically full of activist judges and jurors. And the only way you're going to get past that is to have some kind of a conspiracy case started in another state. And it just so turns out that is happening in Florida as we speak. If we get some kind of conspiracy case coming out of there, it changes the venue of everything, and we don't run into those activist judges' problems anymore. We can talk about that more after the break.
Yeah, the grand conspiracy is across the country. Yeah, let's go to break. When we come back, we'll talk more about this and more.
Well, we are back, and I am actually going to show up on time for this segment. Doug, thanks for picking up the slack. You are a true professional. I'm sure you just didn't even break stride.
Thank you.
So you had a pretty good topic you brought up. It wasn't what I had on the agenda, but I love this one because you're not going to get justice in Virginia, Maryland, and D.C. especially. It's just not going to happen. You have, very strong, biased Democrat jury pools, and the judges. We've seen what the active judges have been doing all year. There's a really good chance that there's a case coming out of Florida that, as we talked about, brings up a conspiracy charge. And two things Doug mentioned before the break: conspiracy encompasses the entire country, but it's an ongoing conspiracy. The statute of limitations is right. Every single act resets the statute of limitations. And this goes all the way back to Spygate stuff in 2015. It can go back to the origins of the Steele dossier and the Russian collusion.
All of them are connected with the same grand conspiracy against Trump. And Florida is a different animal when it comes to the courts. And you got your different circuit courts and district courts out there. And, and unfortunately, what the left does is they do judge shopping. Well, then let's play their game.
Yeah, it's also the fact that, the judges, even if you do have some conservative judges, it's supposed to be random. And it just turns out that, people like Judge Boasberg ends up sitting, sitting on every single case that matters. And that's
and it's like Chong, you look at his resume, and it reads like a DNC donor role. Party leadership and fundraising and his judicial philosophy. And he treats the Constitution more like a suggestion than the supreme law of the land. And that's what we're up against here. And like I said early on before you showed up, this is not a new problem. This goes all the way back to Jefferson when the left, embedded themselves in the courts originally.
Yeah, and it's even more than what we just said. The problem is the Department of Justice itself is allegedly supposed to be part of the Trump administration. It is rife with holdovers that are going to protect the state at all costs. Even the people that Trump appointed, you can't be 100% sure what they're doing. Pam Bondi is getting a lot of abuse, but she's kind of more of a figurehead. The guy running most of the day-to-day operations is a guy by the name of Todd Blanche. He's the assistant attorney general. There's an attorney in Florida again named Peter Tickton. He actually went to high school with Trump, has been friends for a long time, and he came out in a recent article, and he's suggesting that Blanche may be slowing all the Trump justice agenda. He may be the roadblock to everything happening. Titkin would go on and say, look, I trust Donald Trump. I've known him for 60 years. We'll see, if things are going according to his plan or not. But we've seen the people around Donald Trump slow down or even block his efforts in the past. So this is something to keep an eye on. That's why, once again, it's so important to get these cases and prosecutions out of the swamp.
And and as I was saying earlier, I hate the fact that this is the case. As I mentioned earlier, and I want to repeat this for those of you just joining the program. This is Re-Federalist Radio. Lady Justice, and I say this a lot because I want it to sink in here. Lady Justice has a blindfold. You've seen the statue, right, with the scales and the sword. There's a blindfold. The law, that's all that's supposed to matter. What does the law say? And that's Constitution and federal law when it comes to these federal courts. Opinion, ideology, the fact that breakfast is not sitting right in your gut, whatever, is not supposed to influence it. Only the law. Everything else, justice is supposed to be blind to. And what we have here is we have this deep state manipulation in the court system. And this, what we're seeing here with the Bolton case, confirms that this stuff's going. This pattern is way too consistent. We've these, this disturbing trend of unelected judges hijacking executive authority, trying to unconstitutionally micromanage Congress and the president, trying to rewrite national policy from the bench. And the Supreme Court, remember, with the universal injunction, said you can't do it anymore. They don't care. They're doing it anyway still. And this is not what the founding fathers intended. If you've heard me talk before, the judicial branch is supposed to be the weakest of the branches. It's not supposed to hold this kind of power. It's not supposed to be able to dictate to the other branches. Separation of powers is a big deal. And this political theater dressed up in black robes, I think the American people seeing through it. So what's funny to me, and I want you to kind of tee off on this one, is no matter what they do in the courts, we feel, they're beating us. No, because people are watching. I think the most important court, the court of public opinion, is watching, and I think it's hurting the left badly every time they see this stuff. And that's one of the reasons why I think the midterm next year is not going to go the way the left thinks.
Yeah, we saw that, when they were doing the lawfare against Trump during the Biden regime. Mm-hmm. The Trump's polls kept going up each time they threw another terrible prosecution at them.
Right.
You're also seeing now that Trump is going after the perpetrators of the lawfare, his poll numbers are not going down; they're going up. Polls can be rigged, and some polls are more reliable than others. But we're seeing some pretty important trends. A lot of people are leaving the left. A lot more people are registering for Republican. You're getting the independent, the non-registered, non-affiliated parties have been growing as well. What's most important when you're looking at young people, the majority of males under the age of 30 are shifting very much towards the Republican side. Mm-hmm. Young women, not so much, but we'll see. We'll see how that plays out. That's there's a lot of cultural reasons for that. It depends on where one gets their news, etc. But I agree with you, and it's not just because the polls are shifting for the 2026, 2026 elections. You're also seeing a lot of things going on, both through the courts, executive orders, et cetera, about gerrymandering, citizenship status with the census. And I'll be surprised if we don't see an executive order come out about the immigrations and the census status very soon. And I will be asking you when that happens, is that constitutional?
And this is why something I mentioned earlier, and I don't know if you're ready to shift gears or not, but this is the reason why the Adelita Grijalva situation bothers me, is because the Republicans are creating a bad optic with that. It's like, man, you're heading in the right direction, and then you do this, and it's one of those situations where I know you can, but should you?
You guys see the SWAT? For those of you on the radio who heard that SWAT, that was me with a fly swatter. I told Doug earlier this morning we had some wasps or yellow jackets exterminated a couple days ago, and they're getting in the house.
Survivors.
They're coming in to get warm now that it's getting cold out here in New Hampshire. What I just now swatted was the first of the flies to do that, because the flies will try to come inside, and they're listless when they get in there, and they're really easy to swat, but boy, are they annoying for a bit. And there's nothing you can do about it.
They dive bomb you? Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Oh, it's going on right now. I got one buzzing right around me, so I'm going to be jerking around this whole time. But that's the reason for it.
Yeah, where I live, sometimes we get flies big enough to carry off a small child. So I get it.
Yeah, it's not like the. I just hope everyone doesn't think I'm like Mike Pence and the fly's going to tell on me as he lands on me.
Yeah, I can see it buzzing around.
Yeah,
But
dude.
anyway, all right. So what I was talking about with Adelita Grijalva is this is the winner of a special election to replace her father, Arizona's 7th congressional district, and the Speaker of the House, Johnson, has refused to seat her. And I understand the argument. And constitutionally, in my opinion, he can, but there's no historical precedent that this is the norm. He's arguing, hey, we don't have to seat her till we go to full session. That's not the historical norm based on my research. What's your thoughts, sir?
Well, yeah. I agree with you. Before we jump into your article, which I think we definitely should spend the bulk of this show doing, there's there's the conspiracy theory going on around. Of course, is right now Mike Johnson and not Mike Johnson, Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna have a bipartisan bill they want to get put to the floor to release the Epstein files. And right now they got 217 signatures, and she would be the 218th. And the conspiracy theory is, oh, they're stalling on it because Trump's got something to hide on the Epstein files. So that's the background to this and why it's getting so much of a spotlight. Right. So that's why I think your article is really timely because, well, it's going to happen. The government, unfortunately, will not be shut down forever. Darn it. And
I addressed that, and Speaker Johnson has said, "Hey, that's absurd. Has nothing to do with that." And as we've said on this program and other programs before, I mean, if Trump, for example, was listed somewhere, they would have released those files a long time ago. They've had control of these files for a very long time.
Yeah, we've been over that ad nauseum, but the conspiracy theory is not going to die. So why don't we jump into your article? I will share it on the screen. And
and basically, if you've not heard of Adelita Grijalva, it's special election. Her father, Raul Grijalva, passed away, and then she won the special election. And her like her father, she is quite the hard left. There you go. She is quite the hard left, hardcore leftist Democrat. And so Republican leadership, Speaker Mike Johnson, has said, well, we're not going to seat you until we're in full session. Right now, they're in what's called pro forma session due to the fact that we're in a government shutdown. Pro forma is in the Constitution. It is allowed in the Constitution. What it is the House has remained in session, but they don't have a quorum. In other words, there's not a majority present in order to carry out business. So he's saying, well, we can't do business. We don't have quorum. So we got to wait until we have a full legislature or at least quorum. And that's not necessarily so. When we talk about you can't do business, that's like voting on resolutions and bills and things like that. So what has happened is the Arizona's attorney general then has sued Speaker Mike Johnson over it. And guess what court? District Court in Washington, D.C. The lawsuit Grijalva v. Johnson. And I think it's a scare tactic. They're also hoping that this federal court will force Congress to act. But if they were to remain consistent historically with precedent by courts, this would get thrown out because it causes something called political question. And the political question argument is basically it disallows courts from intervening in matters involving Congress due to the separation of powers concept. In other words, the federal courts can't dictate to Congress regarding their own rules. And I listed 5 cases where that argument has been used to dismiss a case. One of them being one that I was associated with, the Constitution Association versus Kamala Devi Harris. And that's one of the reasons I know about this idea. I'm sure I'm probably the only writer out there talking about this when it comes to this case. It should be struck down because you've got basically the House is following its own rules, and someone sue and say, no, you can't follow your rules.
It's interesting. The 5th case you listed is Humphrey's Executor versus U.S., and that is going to be in play at the Supreme Court this session. Mm-hmm. Also interesting, I talked about the political question when I gave my speech Monday night, talking about Reynolds v. Sims, because prior to the mid-'60s, the Supreme Court would avoid getting involved in the political questions, especially when it came to apportionment. That flip-flopped in the Warren Court, and that's kind of how we got here where we are today. But we'll jump back into that, I think, when we get back from the break. All right, we are back, and I was in here for the beginning of the show. Doug, were you? Did you give thanks to our good friend Leo Zaki, candidate?
Absolutely, ZakiRadio.com. And a reminder to you California listeners, LeoZaki.com. He's running for governor, California. Check it out. Now, when we left off, you had mentioned Humphrey's executive versus United States.
Yeah, that's going to become. We need to do a full segment on that. I just wanted to point out that it is going to be talked about at the Supreme Court, and has a lot to do with, if I'm not mistaken, this is the one that they're talking about whether Trump has the authority to fire anyone he wants in his executive branch. That is the right one, right?
Yeah, and the thing is, once again, political question: can the courts dictate to a president on how to handle his own branch and his job as the person in charge of the executive branch? Because it says in Article 2, that the executive power is vested in whom? The President of the United States. He has the power to do what he needs to do with his branch. He, in a sense, is the CEO of his branch.
What's funny, it's interesting. Doug and I are also going through Madison's and notes from the Philadelphia Convention of 1787. And one of the subjects on the table, as they were crafting the Constitution, was exactly what kind of power this executive branch was going to have. And, they talked about having one executive, three executives, how power would be delineated. All this stuff was debated. I mean, so there is precedence for this, and there's a long history of these questions. Trump favors what's called a unitary executive. And that's been pretty much the status quo and is strengthening over the last several decades. It may not necessarily be the original intent in some degrees. I personally think the opposite.
It was hammered into place under Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, and the attitude pretty much became everything I did was not unconstitutional because it's not prohibited in the Constitution. That's not, of course, the right way to look at the Constitution, but that has become the attitude regarding the president. And then over the years, Congress has also, just through legislation, giving the president more and more power. Because one of the things has been understood that sometimes the president does need to have these direct powers on certain things. This goes back to this. My friend Dennis Jackson says this, and I love it. For God so loved the world, he didn't send a committee. And so I get that. But at what point have we gone too far, given the president too many powers?
Yeah, and at the same time, Congress has abdicated its power over the handed some of it over to the executive branch. The judicial
tariffs being one of them.
Yeah, and the judicial branch at the same time has, through judicial rulings, taken power from both Congress and the states and the executive branch. So it's gotten to the point where the branch that was supposed to be the strongest, the legislative, is now pretty much the most feeble and the loudest.
And the weakest, the judicial branch, now is the final arbiters to everything. And they're not supposed to be.
Agreed. Let's jump into your article. Talk about it more. I like it. I got a chance to read it beforehand, so let's. It's got some fun points.
So if the federal governments do not use the political question argument to dismiss this case and instead rule that Speaker Johnson is in violation of the Constitution or some law on the books, the courts would be in violation of past precedent. This is what I was talking about a moment ago, set by the federal court system and the Supreme Court, by the way, I might add, and would also violate the fact that in Article 1, Section 5, and this is the key to me, of the Constitution, each House of Congress is tasked with being its own judge of election returns and qualifications of its own members and may determine its own rules of its proceedings. In short, regardless of what the courts say, regardless of what anybody says, Speaker Johnson and the Republican majority in the House of Representatives is fully constitutionally authorized to hold off Grijalva being seated. I don't see the reasoning behind it, as I've written, but I don't fully agree with Speaker Johnson's action, but he's constitutionally permitted to take the action, or should I say inaction. In other words, you can. It's a question of should you.
And could he be overruled? If
the courts have no authority to overrule it.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, if the Democrats had control, they'd tell the courts to buzz off.
They've done so a few times. And this goes back to now they've made their ruling. Let's see you try to enforce it. So.
Well, and when it comes to the political question, now they do have a case that's in their favor. The ones who are saying that he can't do this, he can't keep from being sat, that Grijalva can't be allowed to be sat or not get her oath yet. Powell versus McCormick in 1969, which held that the House cannot use internal rules to deny or delay seating of a qualified member. That is actually in contradiction to all the other ones. And so now we've got a crisis when it comes to these court decisions. You've got the federal courts literally against itself on this. So which is it? Is it Powell versus McCormick? The House can't use its internal rules, or political question? It's none of the court's business to dictate to the Congress what it does with its own rules.
Well, it's interesting. The Supreme Court has been gradually moving a little bit back towards, away from judicial activism and more towards original intent. We're not anywhere close yet. But 1969 was the Burger Court, which is probably one of the two worst courts of even my parents' lifetime, along with the Warren Court, which you hear me talk about all the time.
Yeah, funny they came from the same decade, but anyway.
The 60s were, what do you call it? You'd think the progressive era would have been more egregious, but they did, the 60s judges just built on what the progressive judges had one building block after another, and that's how they incrementally done all this judicial power grab. So I could see this court overturning a 1969 decision a lot more than it would some of the older decisions which you quoted.
And I've mentioned this before, that in Garland versus United States in 2019, Clarence Thomas, part of his judicial opinion was that if something is egregiously unconstitutional, it not only can be overturned, it must be. So they're not tied to precedent, but you do have more precedent when it comes to political question. And then something else I was talking about earlier. Remember, I was talking about how the president runs he's vested with those powers. Well, the Congress has that same type of power to run their own business without outside interference, and that principle is known as procedural sovereignty argument. And basically, what it means is they have the sovereignty as a separate branch of the United States government to do as they're supposed to do. Separation of powers. Nobody else has the authority to dictate to them. And if they want to wait until things are back in action once the government shutdown is over, that's their call.
And that's really one of the interesting points is how politicized this is. Now, we know the Democrat senators, this has come out, they held off on voting because they wanted the No Kings protest of last weekend to go first. And, they wanted to make sure that they had actually something to protest, because apparently we don't have kings and still don't have kings. So they had to have something to rally behind. But
or as some of the commentators says, hey, the No Kings rally worked. We don't have a king.
Yeah. They are saying that at the first one. The joke, it's great, but not to mention the man on the street interviews with put a microphone in some protester's face. Why are you here? I don't know. Protest
because he's an authoritarian. How?
Yeah, give me an example. Well, I don't know. Everyone else doesn't like it. It's ridiculous. And most of the ones I see, basically it's a release from the old folks' home. It's like a field trip for them.
Well, it's the old hippies from the late 60s, early 70s, and now they're the ones that are the geriatrics, and they're trying to relive the late 60s, I think, and early 70s. I think that's what it's just their one last gasp. I'm not too far behind that, but we are the next generation, and that's something about the pendulum swinging. What followed the hippies and the hard left crazies of the late 60s, early 70s? Our generation, which is very conservative. And now we've got this generation kind of being wacky. What's right behind them? The younger generations. They are now banking a hard right towards Trump. I hate using the right-left paradigm, but it just made sense there.
Yeah. When you say political left, political right, because it talks about how it's being politicized. And speaking of politics, there's no doubt in my mind Mike Johnson is using this to leverage the Senate Democrats. Everything, the longer you keep government shut down, we're going to make it hurt more and more for you. And it's going to be a big deal when they start taking away these EBT cards on November 1st. There's a lot of people out there that aren't going to be able to eat, that have been sucking on the government teat for a long time. And the vast majority of those are Democrat voters.
Now, earlier I said that really this is actually kind of a operation with really no effect. I know that's what he's doing. He's trying to leverage the Senate. But when it comes to Grijalva and her ability to do anything, the only thing he's keeping her from doing is getting her staffing set up and getting into her office because she can't vote anyway. They're in a pro forma session. And the moment she's in there, she's going to vote. She'll sign that that petition and so forth. And
yeah,
so it really, on the surface, really doesn't accomplish anything. Now, if and I didn't put this in my article, and that's a good point. If this is saying, hey, look what we can slap you around with because you keep the government shutdown going, Senate, that may be a part of it. I think you might be onto something there.
Yeah, I would hope that we are playing politics big time on just about every single issue out there. So that's where my first instinct to go is, okay, who gains from this politically? What are the optics going to be? And both sides are crying about this. And I'd be honest with you, if this was a Republican being kept from being seated or sworn in, I should say, I'd say, look, why? I'd ask the same questions. And it's being made out to be a much bigger deal than it is.
Mm-hmm.
But it really brings up some really fun legal and constitutional questions. So that's why I enjoyed your article so much.
Well, and with such a slim margin between the majority and the minority, when it comes to procedural maneuvers and collecting signatures for discharge petitions, forcing certain floor actions, that that margin is very important. And the Republicans, they almost have to have a full unanimous agreement because it's so close. But here's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping people are watching this and are going, wow, if we want Trump's agenda to happen, this is too narrow of a margin. And we need to get more Republicans in the House. And I think we might see a bunch of seats swing because of this and other things. Once again, same thing I said earlier, the court of public opinion is watching.
Yeah, and as I said last night we talked about it a little bit last night on Ron Partaine's channel, the Untold History channel, you got as many as, if everything breaks right, and this is without any swing in political momentum, the Republicans could be picking up anywhere between 20 and 50 plus seats just in terms of rulings, gerrymandering.
Well, the numbers I've been hearing is between 19 to 27. I haven't heard anybody say more than 27, but
if they're able to yank if they're able to get a new census in time, that's where a bunch of them shift. And then, of course, there's the gerrymandering, there's the census one, and then there's
they're cleaning the voter rolls. There's a push for voter ID. There's a push to get rid of mail-in ballots. We'll see how much of it sticks. But yeah, this could be interesting. And once again, and I went through history. I'm not going to go through it here during this episode, but if you go to the DouglasVGibbs.com, you can find the article about Grijalva. I mean, I go through the first 6 presidents. Never once, aside from something like questions regarding eligibility or the election, or something like that, has there been anybody held back? When someone showed up, even if they were late because of travel restrictions, boom, they were sworn in. It's time for a break.
Okay, we are here for our final segment of today's episode of Re-Federalist Radio, where we look at current events from a original intent of the Constitution lens. I've got a Supreme Court case and maybe even executive order to talk about. But before we go there, Doug, do you want to hammer home any final points on the congressional seating issue?
Yeah, technically the House controls its own proceedings. It's up to them. The courts have no business dictating to either House of Congress how to handle their own proceedings, which gets back to that political question argument. Now, the truth is, as much as I respect Speaker Johnson and the difficult position he faces during a government shutdown, and I get why he might be leveraging, as I stated earlier, he has no historical defense for withholding the oath from a duly elected certified member of the United States House of Representatives. The people who voted her in, even if she's a hard lefty, deserve their person to be in their seat. That's just the way I see it. And now, that said, I like Johnson. I appreciate the MAGA Republicans, but I don't believe that the voters of Arizona 7th District should be voiceless in the People's Chamber, the House of Representatives.
And mentioning those voters is important because that's almost a 70% Hispanic district. Mm-hmm. And obviously, it's been carrying, the Democrats have been carrying it for quite some time. That may be one of those gerrymandering districts because if you look at the districts in Arizona, they pretty much look like a salamander. We'll see if that one gets impacted at all. So she might have a short stay in Congress, or she might be there for a long time.
Yeah, we'll see. All right. So what do you have next on the Barbie?
I've got a fun Supreme Court case coming up. They've agreed to hear, and I am going to get my screen up there. The name of the case is Suncor Energy Sales Incorporated, and ExxonMobil versus the county commissioners of Boulder County, City of Boulder. Now, what's at stake here is you're seeing a lot of state Supreme Courts taking on cases where they are in blue states that are suing energy companies for climate change that's happening outside their borders. So just stopping right there, Doug, who would have jurisdiction over that? Would a state court have any? I mean, if we're following the real Article 3, should this even be happening?
Well, if this is something that's a dispute that's crossing state lines, no, it's none of their business. It should go. It should be in the federal court system. And it's fascinating too because we hear it all the time from the left. Well, Commerce Clause. Okay, so where's the Commerce Clause now?
All right, so let me read a little bit about the brief because it brings up some really important points. We may or may not even talk about climate change, but
well, and for those of you who are listening, climate change, natural phenomenon. It's all about power, but I'm sure most of you realize that. All right, go ahead.
Well, most of the world does at this point in time.
Yeah, true enough.
This case provides the court with its best opportunity yet to resolve one of the most important questions currently pending in the lower courts. Energy companies that produce and sell fossil fuels are facing numerous lawsuits in state courts across the nation, seeking billions of dollars in damages for injuries allegedly caused by the contribution of greenhouse gas emissions to global climate change.
Sounds like they're trying to make it a class action type lawsuit.
Yeah, they're trying to hit them from so many different states they're going to bankrupt them. And that really is the goal. Now, I've been begging for a real case on this because I want to see it litigated, the case that, of the whole carbon climate change, their entire theory. I'd love to see it put on trial and have experts that have been silenced for decades, prepare their evidence and be able to show it to the world. Yeah. I've been begging for this for years. But this, I don't want to see it done state by state in an effort to bankrupt. And this should be the reverse of a class action. If 15 different states are suing me for the same thing, shouldn't I be able to consolidate it into one case?
Yeah, that's what they did again when there was all those lawsuits against Obamacare.
But as the court has recognized for over a century, the structure of our constitutional system does not permit a state to provide relief under state law for injuries allegedly caused by pollution emanating from outside the state.
Yeah, there we go. Disputes across state lines. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's the Clean Skies Law. Someone better let the California legislature know about that because someone also ought to let them know that when your borders don't extend north, up into the atmosphere, you let China keep on polluting while you cut your own energy, you're not actually producing a net gain there. You're just shifting where any pollution or CO2 comes from, because we do have a porous atmosphere. It is a two-way door. This case presents the question whether that longstanding principle precludes the state law claims in the nationwide climate change litigation. The answer to that question is surely yes. Okay, I'll read a couple more paragraphs because then we'll get into it. This court has already recognized the importance of the question presented by calling for the views of the Solicitor General in Sunoco versus City of Honolulu. Since the previous administration filed its brief in this case, that would be the Biden pro-climate change, the new administration has filed a brief in another climate change case, arguing the federal law precludes state law claims seeking similar relief for similar climate change claims. The Colorado Supreme Court's divided decision below deepens a clear conflict on that question. Only this court can resolve it. Petitioners are energy companies that produce and sell fossil fuels, respondents of the City of Boulder and the surrounding county. Like numerous other state and local governments nationwide, respondents filed this action in state court, are asserting claims purportedly arising under state law to recover for alleged harms caused by the effects of global climate change.
Now, something fascinating here. How do you prove the harm? For example, when I was part of the Constitution Association versus Kamala Harris, and there was no standing for individuals because the courts don't recognize harm typically when it comes to widespread. How do you prove it? How do you show it when you don't directly lose something? The only reason why we were able to get the lawsuit passed that on standing was because the organization, the nonprofit organization, Constitutional Association, had expended volunteer hours and monies due to this case. So that's the only way it could show harm, because you couldn't really show harm in a general manner. So how do you show harm here?
Well, these are the people that believe we have something called a climate refugee that comes from an island that's actually gained in landmass over the last 2 decades. So they're going to have a really tough time. You just like every single climate change prediction, Al Gore, where we're going to die in the next 15 years. And here we are alive 30 years later, and nothing's changed. It's going to be very hard to show harm, either legally or practically.
It's got to be rough to be young, though. Everything's doom. You're not going to grow to an old age. You're going to die, and if you don't die, you're going to live underwater.
And why should you even bother having children? Because life sucks.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, let's switch. We'll keep an eye on that one.
That's interesting. That's a good case to discuss.
Where's the other fun one I had up here? You know what? Something we always do if we need a little bit of filler. We always go to the White House and look for Trump's recent executive orders and talk about whether they're constitutional or not.
The White House site for executive orders and the SCOTUS blog, those are like the two best places to find things.
For this show, absolutely. Okay, so let's take a look at what we've had recently. We haven't done this in a few months. Ensuring accountability, continued accountability in federal hiring, absolutely executive branch privilege.
Mm-hmm. It's his branch. He's the CEO.
We may get into the saving TikTok while protecting national security. So I'm going to make an argument if we get into that it is not. It is an unconstitutional executive order. The federal government, the executive branch has no business being involved in being an active investor or having a say in a private company. That being said, there are national security implications. The one I wanted to talk about here is the gold card. Basically, Trump, this is part of his immigration push, and he presented something that the Secretary of Commerce, in coordination with the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Homeland Security, shall establish a gold card program authorizing an alien who makes an unrestricted gift to the Department of Commerce under 15 U.S.C. 1522, and for whom a corporation or similar entity makes such a gift, to establish eligibility for an immigrant visa using an expedited process to the extent consistent with the law and public safety and national security concerns. The requisite gift shall be $1 million for an individual donating on his or her own behalf, and $2 million for a corporation or similar entity donating on behalf of an individual. That's interesting. It's pay to play, without a doubt.
Yeah, it's a businessman's way of looking at it. How do you make some money out of this? And so I get that, but do I appreciate the pay to play? If you have enough money, it doesn't matter who you are, you're going to get in there.
Yeah, oops, I'm sorry. Stop the ship, please, Mr. Producer. There we go. Hey, quick reflexes. He's on the ball. I think part of this is done to mollify the Silicon Valley people they were starting to be a little concerned with the H-1B visas. They're saying we still need to be able to get the top talent. And what Trump's saying is, you want the top talent, you can pay for it. If it's worth it, if it's that much better than hiring Americans, we'll put a price tag on that. And I think there's a little bit of that. And I wonder if Elon Musk might have been whispering in Trump's ear now that they're talking again. But
once again, you got to remember, though, that Trump is not a politician. He's a businessman. So he looks at things through a businessman's lens. I'm not condoning or condemning. I'm just saying when Trump does things, his first thought is, how do we make money out of this? That's his way he operates typically when it comes to deal making and things like that. How are we going to come out on top?
Well,
and so I get it.
The question, of course, always, is that a constitutional executive order? Does the president have the power to create what essentially is it legislation or is it guidance on existing legislation?
Yeah, there needs to be legislation. He created law there, I think, and so I would say technically it's unconstitutional. I get what he's doing, and the federal government does have the authority, but it needs to be legislated first.
All right, we're coming to the end. Everybody, please watch this and other shows on my Rumble channel, War Space Hamster. Doug, tell them where to find you and take us home.
DouglasVGibbs.com, DouglasVGibbs.com. I also have another site, Navigation to Liberty, navigation, the number 2, liberty.com, if you're looking for a great list of where I'm at on the radio and all my books. And as always, united we stand, combined we kick butt. God bless America, my friends. God bless you.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Until the next time, cheers.